They handcuffed a Black U.S. Army general. One call ended their careers. The quiet streets of Arlington, Virginia. A black SUV cruised steadily down Columbia Pike, unremarkable in its sleek efficiency. Inside, General Alexandria Reed sat composed, her uniform crisp even though she was off duty. She had just left a breakfast roundtable at the Pentagon, where she'd spoken to rising officers about leadership, integrity, and what it means to serve a country that didn't always serve you back. At 52, with salt at her temples and wisdom lining her voice, she had earned respect not just through rank, but through quiet, relentless perseverance. The streets were still sleepy when she pulled over to grab coffee at a local spot she loved, black-owned, woman-run. A rare chance to slow down. But as she stepped back into her vehicle, iced coffee in hand, her calm was pierced by flashing red and blue lights behind her. No siren, just lights. Unmarked sedan. Unfamiliar tension. Before she could turn the key, 3 plainclothes men approached, fast, aggressive. One knocked hard on the driver's side window with the back of his knuckle. Step out of the vehicle. Now. General Reed blinked. Excuse me. Out. Of. The. Car. Another barked, already reaching for the handle. Officers, may I see your... Don't move, one of them snapped. The other was already at the passenger's side, yanking the door open. A third stood behind, hand resting on his belt, posture tight. General Reed moved slowly, controlled. Her military training kicked in, her voice steady, eyes sharp. You're making a mistake. But they weren't listening. Within seconds, her arms were wrenched behind her back, wrists cuffed with brutal force. She didn't yell, didn't resist. She just asked again, voice even but cold. Who do you think I am? They didn't answer. They didn't ask. They assumed. And for now, that was enough to silence a woman who had served for presidents, led troops in 2 wars, and held secrets of state no civilian could comprehend. As they shoved her into the back seat of their car, the general looked out the window, watching her coffee tip over and spill onto the asphalt, milk swirling into the dust. This wasn't just an arrest. It was a reckoning waiting to unfold. The back seat of the unmarked cruiser was cramped, the leather cold against General Reed's arms. The cuffs bit into her wrists. She sat upright, eyes focused straight ahead, jaw clenched tight. Silence wasn't foreign to her. It was part of her training. But this silence? This was different. The officer driving hadn't said a word since slamming the door shut. The other 2 sat flanking her like prison walls, one beside her, the other in the front passenger seat. They hadn't identified themselves properly, hadn't read her rights, hadn't asked for ID. They didn't know who she was, and they didn't care to ask. You matched the description, the driver finally said, eyes flicking to her in the mirror. That's all we need. Alexandria raised an eyebrow. You've detained a United States Army general. I suggest you look again. The man in the passenger seat scoffed. Save the act. We've heard it before. The SUV turned down a side street, quieter, narrower. She could see the Washington Monument in the distance, still standing, even as her dignity was under siege. Her heart thudded, not from fear, but from a sense of violation. Familiar, replayed in the lives of too many others who looked like her. It wasn't the first time she'd felt unseen, but it was the first time someone had put cuffs on her to prove it. Name, one barked. She said nothing. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, staring at him like he'd just asked her to recite the alphabet backwards. He didn't deserve the information. Not yet. Look, lady, we can do this the hard way. You already are, she said flatly. The officer next to her shifted uncomfortably. Maybe he was starting to feel the weight of her silence. Maybe not. But the air in the car had changed. Not fear, but something close to doubt. Then her voice cut through again, measured, icy, unmistakably in command. You've made a serious mistake. You have 60 seconds to check the credentials in my wallet, back left pocket, or I make one call to the Pentagon. They laughed, dismissive, ignorant. But that laugh would cost them everything. Because General Alexandria Reed didn't bluff. And somewhere in the West Wing, a red phone would soon ring. The SUV jerked to a stop in the lot behind a shuttered warehouse near South Capitol Street. Not a precinct. Not even close. The officer in the passenger seat stepped out and opened the door beside her. Out, he ordered. General Reed didn't move. Her voice came low, controlled. You're about to destroy your careers over a lie. The man scoffed. What lie? The one you told yourselves about who I am. She didn't wait for a reply. She shifted, stood, and faced him squarely, despite the cuffs, despite the threat humming around her. Her posture was military perfect, her chin high. I've given you multiple chances to de-escalate. You ignored everyone. That's when she moved. Not fast, not aggressively, just enough to tilt her body so they could see the leather ID wallet peeking from her back pocket. The one with the gold Department of Defense insignia. The one that would have stopped this hours ago. The officer beside her froze, eyes narrowing. You planted that? He muttered. She almost laughed. You think I planted a DOD-issued federal ID on myself while cuffed in your back seat? He didn't answer. Instead, she spoke again, calm, razor-sharp. Get my phone from the front seat. The officer hesitated, but curiosity, or perhaps the flicker of doubt, overpowered him. He retrieved the phone, still unlocked from her last use, and handed it over warily. She lifted her cuffed hands as best she could, tilted the phone against the glass, and with practiced speed, voice-dialed the only contact listed under her favorites. Office of the Joint Chiefs, secure line. The line picked up on the second ring. Joint Operations, this is Colonel Rivers. This is General Reed. Badge number 058, 114, X-ray. I've been detained by 3 unmarked officers, plainclothes, no probable cause. I need verification dispatched to my location. A pause. General, location ping received. Stand by. The air inside the vehicle changed. The officers stared, mouths slightly agape. Disbelief clung to them like smoke. And then came the voice on speaker. Assets inbound. Estimated arrival, 2 minutes. Do not disconnect. Hold position. General Reed turned, slowly, deliberately, and locked eyes with the man who'd first touched her wrist without consent. You have 90 seconds to uncuff me and apologize. But they just stood there, staring at the woman they'd tried to reduce, and finally seeing who she really was. The sound came first, low, steady, and building, like a humming storm on the horizon. Then the unmarked cruiser shook slightly as 2 black government Suburbans pulled into the lot, tires cutting sharply across gravel, windows blacked out. Doors opened in a synchronized blur. Out stepped 5 men and women in formal Pentagon security attire, badges drawn, earpieces in, moving with the efficiency of people who did not ask questions twice. The tallest among them, a man with salt and pepper hair and a presence like a steel gate, spoke first. General Reed, ma'am. She nodded once, calm as ever. Colonel Morris. His eyes dropped to the handcuffs. The flicker in his jaw was almost imperceptible, but General Reed saw it. Who put those on her? He asked, voice deceptively level. The 3 plainclothes officers didn't answer. One stepped back slightly. Another looked at the ground. Colonel Morris turned to his team. Body cams on. Document everything. A red light blinked on across all chests. Then, calmly, he stepped toward the officer who had driven the unmarked cruiser. Badge number. Excuse me, the officer replied. Your badge. Now. Full name, agency affiliation, and the exact reason for detaining a high-ranking official of the United States Armed Forces without probable cause. The man fumbled for his ID, lips parting but no words forming. General Reed spoke instead. They never asked for ID. Never told me why I was being detained. Took me from a public street to a non-precinct location. They assumed I was a threat because I was a black woman sitting in my own car, wearing civilian clothes, on a weekday morning. The colonel's jaw tightened. He turned to the female officer in his unit. Ma'am, remove the cuffs. The clinking of metal echoed in the empty lot. Her wrists were red, but her voice? Still steel, still unshaken. I told them they had 60 seconds. It's been 3 minutes. Colonel Morris turned back to the officers. Your careers just ended. The cuffs hit the asphalt with a dull, metallic thud. For a moment, no one moved. The officers, still trying to process the unraveling of their authority, stood frozen, faces a blend of confusion, fear, and something that looked an awful lot like shame. General Reed rubbed her wrists, the red marks vivid against her dark skin. She didn't flinch. She didn't need to. Her dignity was already reclaiming the space. Colonel Morris turned to one of his aides. Secure the footage from nearby traffic cams. I want timestamps, audio, and any visual of the initial detainment. The plainclothes officers perked up suddenly, panic sparking behind their eyes. Sir, one of them tried, voice suddenly respectful. We didn't know who she was. That's the problem. General Reed cut in, her voice clear and deliberate. You didn't care who I was. You just assumed I didn't belong. Silence. The aide stepped away, already making calls. Another Pentagon official approached her with a medical kit, but she waved it off gently. I'm fine. Just get the paperwork started. She was already thinking several steps ahead. Colonel Morris turned back to the officers, this time with a cold finality in his tone. You will remain here until Internal Affairs arrives. You will surrender your weapons, your badges, and your right to speak without legal counsel. You can't, the youngest officer began, but was quickly silenced by the look from Morris. You want to talk about what can't be done? He asked, voice flat. You detained a decorated Army general, without cause, without procedure, and without so much as a name check. You dragged her off the street like she was a criminal. That is not just misconduct. That's career suicide. He paused, then added, and depending on how the general wishes to proceed, it may be criminal. One of the officers began to shake. General Reed finally looked at them, not with anger, but with something worse, disappointment. You didn't just humiliate me, she said. You humiliated your oath. Then, calmly, she turned and walked toward one of the black Suburbans, her back straight, her steps measured, and the men behind her, uniformed, armed, and previously so sure of their power, stood in utter, irreversible silence. The Suburban was cool and quiet, a sharp contrast to the heat outside and the wildfire that had just ignited in the careers of 3 plainclothes officers. General Reed sat in the back seat, her posture unwavering, her eyes fixed ahead. Colonel Morris slid in beside her, gently closing the door. Ma'am, he said softly, the Pentagon wants to know if you'd like to press criminal charges. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked down at her wrists. Faint impressions of the handcuffs still marked her skin like scars of a quiet war. No, she said finally. Not yet. He nodded, waiting. But I want their commanding officer. On the phone. Now. Morris tapped his earpiece and spoke in code. Within 30 seconds, a secure call was patched through. The screen on the dash lit up with a name. Chief Alan Rourke, DCPD Special Operations. The moment the line connected, Reed spoke. This is General Alexandria Reed. Your officers have just made the gravest error of their careers. On the other end, Rourke's voice cracked with alarm. General, what happened? She told him. Every detail, with precision and calm fury. No embellishment. Just the cold, humiliating truth of being handcuffed by men who saw her race before they saw her humanity, her presence, her history. There was silence on the line when she finished. Then, General, I had no idea. This is unacceptable. It is, she replied flatly. Please, allow me to handle this internally. No, she said sharply, cutting him off. This doesn't get swept into a file and forgotten. This gets remembered. Then, her voice dropped an octave, quiet, devastating. You don't get to erase me twice. Rourke was silent again. She continued, effective immediately, I want them suspended without pay. Internal Affairs opens a case today. Their names go on record. Their badges are surrendered. And if I see a press release that softens the truth, I will hold your entire department accountable. Yes, ma'am, Rourke said, his voice small now. She hung up without another word. The silence in the Suburban stretched. Colonel Morris glanced at her. You sure you don't want to press charges? She turned to the window. I want consequences. And I want them to remember the day they put cuffs on a general. Back at DCPD headquarters, the fallout had already begun. The 3 officers, Mason, Tripp, and Delgado, sat in a cold, windowless room, stripped of their badges, sidearms locked in a sealed evidence box. What had started as routine bravado had now spiraled into panic. Real panic. Mason, the one who'd cuffed her, paced like a man on the edge of a cliff. "A general?" he muttered. "We cuffed a damn general?" Tripp sat frozen, elbows on the table, head in his hands. Not just a general. A Joint Chiefs, cleared general. That's career-ending. Maybe worse. Delgado, the youngest, just stared at the table. He hadn't spoken since Internal Affairs arrived. The door opened. Two IA officers entered, both in pressed suits, no warmth in their eyes. "Gentlemen," the lead investigator said, "you are now the subject of a formal misconduct and civil rights investigation. You are entitled to counsel. But be advised, the Pentagon has already submitted documentation. You won't be able to sweep this under any procedural rug." Mason opened his mouth to object, but the investigator held up a hand. "Save it. This wasn't just excessive force. This was racial profiling. Unlawful detainment. You didn't follow protocol. You didn't verify ID. And you transported a decorated federal official to an unregulated location with no justification." Tripp mumbled, "She didn't look like a general." The investigator stared at him, unblinking. "And what exactly does a general look like?" The silence that followed was louder than any shout. On the screen behind them, General Alexandria Reed's service record was displayed. Commendations, deployments, years of service, testimony before Congress, international peacekeeping missions, Bronze Star, Distinguished Service Medal. The weight of it made the room feel heavier. Delgado finally spoke, voice hollow. "We didn't know." "And that," the IA officer replied coldly, "is why you're here." They weren't just being investigated now. They were being remembered for all the wrong reasons. By morning, the story had already begun to spread, though not from any press release. A Pentagon aide had leaked a memo, not maliciously, but out of disbelief. The subject line alone was enough to ignite fire across media desks nationwide. Incident report: detainment of General Alexandria Reed. Use of force by DCPD. By 7 a.m., every major network had it. Cable news anchors blinked in disbelief as they read aloud the headline. A Black U.S. Army general was handcuffed by police who failed to ask her name. Footage from a nearby traffic cam had been quietly released, too. It showed the three plainclothes officers swarming General Reed's SUV, yanking open her door, one cuffing her wrists while she calmly tried to speak. The video was grainy, but the disrespect was sharp. On social media, her name trended instantly. Not as a victim, but as a symbol. People shared her accolades, her speeches, photos of her in uniform standing beside presidents, addressing troops, leading humanitarian missions. They compared her calm restraint in that moment to the reckless aggression of the officers who couldn't be bothered to ask a single question. Headlines began to shift. Power misread, General Alexandria Reed and the price of assumption. From the Pentagon to handcuffs. What happened to General Reed is every black woman's fear. Respect in uniform, disregard out of it. At the heart of it all, Reed said nothing publicly. She didn't need to. Her silence was its own indictment, and the country was listening. In a high-floor conference room inside the Pentagon, 5 men and 2 women sat around an oak table, a sense of urgency thick in the air. At the head of the table sat Secretary Whitmore, the Secretary of Defense. He wasn't known for emotion, but today, even his hands fidgeted slightly atop the polished surface. General Alexandria Reed stood across from them, not with rage, not with pleading, but with a silence that spoke louder than any reprimand. They had all seen the footage. They had all read the report. You were detained without cause, physically restrained, and removed from a public location without being asked a single identifying question. Secretary Whitmore began, his voice careful. "We are aware of the gravity." General Reed didn't blink. "You should be." One of the civilian legal advisors cleared her throat. "General, the White House is also briefed. We expect a public statement soon. We'd like to offer you control over the language." "I'm not interested in optics," Reed replied. "Then what are you asking for?" someone else pressed. Her gaze swept the room. I'm asking for consequences that outlive the news cycle. I want more than apologies. I want policy, mandatory de-escalation training, civilian interaction protocols, an oversight committee for plainclothes operations. And I want those 3 men off the street. Today. A beat of stunned silence. Then, she added, calm, pointed, I spent my life keeping this country safe. If it can't keep me safe in return, what exactly are we protecting? Her words hung heavy, circling the room like gravity. Finally, Secretary Whitmore nodded. We'll begin the process immediately. And one more thing, Reed said, voice softer now, but no less firm. I want to speak to every new cadet at the academy this year. First day, mandatory. Of course, the secretary said. What message do you want to give them? She looked toward the window, the Capitol dome glinting in the distance. That rank doesn't always protect you, but character might protect someone else. 2 weeks later, at the U.S. Military Academy in West Point, the lecture hall buzzed with the nervous energy of first-year cadets. Starched uniforms, fresh haircuts, rigid posture, all eyes forward as the door at the back opened. General Alexandria Reed entered with quiet authority. No music, no fanfare, just the sound of boots on polished tile and the presence of someone whose very being demanded attention. As she stepped up to the podium, the room stood instinctively. But she held up a hand before anyone could speak. Sit, she said softly. This won't be a ceremony. They obeyed. She looked out across the sea of young, eager faces. Some wide-eyed, some already hardened. All of them watching her, some with reverence, some with curiosity, others with subtle discomfort they didn't yet understand. When I was your age, she began, I believed the uniform would protect me. That honor, hard work, and loyalty would earn me the same respect I gave to others. She paused. But 2 weeks ago, in the city I swore to defend, I was pulled from my car, handcuffed, and treated like a threat, without a single question asked. Not because I failed my country, but because 3 men saw my skin before they saw my service. The room was silent, not tense, not uncomfortable, just absorbing. Respect, she continued, is not a reward you give only to those who fit your expectations. It's the standard you hold yourself to, especially when no one's watching. She scanned the room again, slower this time. I'm not here because of what happened to me. I'm here because it's your responsibility to make sure it doesn't keep happening to anyone else. Then she added, quiet but firm, if you can't carry that weight, you don't belong in uniform. A long silence followed. Then, one by one, the cadets began to rise, not by command, but by choice. Not a salute, just a quiet, solemn stand. Respect, earned. Back in her office at the Pentagon, General Reed sat alone, the late afternoon sun casting long amber shadows across the mahogany floor. Her desk was lined with framed photographs, some with fellow generals, some with soldiers in the field, and one of her mother, arms wrapped around a much younger Alexandria in a cap too large for her head. A knock tapped at the door. Colonel Morris stepped in, his expression unreadable. They've resigned, he said quietly. All 3. Reed nodded once. No celebration. No triumph. They said anything? A few words. Nothing that'll make the news. Nothing that'll change what they did. She stared at the window for a moment, the Potomac glinting in the distance. Sometimes silence is the only truth they have left. Morris hesitated. The Joint Chiefs are drafting a citation. They want to present you with a medal for how you handled the incident. That made her pause. A medal, she repeated, almost amused. Yes, ma'am. She stood slowly, walked to the far side of her office, and opened a drawer. Inside were dozens of medals, shiny, heavy, symbols of wars survived and missions completed. She held one in her hand, then let it fall gently back into place. No, she said. They can keep the medal. Morris tilted his head. May I ask why? She turned, her eyes steady, voice quiet. Because I don't need a medal for surviving something I never should have endured. What I want is for the next black woman sitting in her car to be left in peace. That will be reward enough. There was nothing more to say, just the sound of her steady breath, and the knowing that history had quietly turned a page, because one woman refused to be reduced. It was a quiet Sunday morning when General Reed returned to the same cafe, the one where it all began. The owner, Mrs. Wallace, spotted her immediately from behind the counter and rushed over, wrapping her in a warm, lingering embrace. "Lord have mercy, General," she whispered. They didn't know who they were messing with. Reed chuckled softly. "That's the thing, Marla. It shouldn't matter if they knew or not." She took her usual seat by the window, this time without interruption, without suspicion, without cuffs. Just a woman, her coffee, and her dignity reclaimed. Outside, life moved as usual. Cars rolled past. Joggers ran by. But for Reed, the world had shifted, subtly, meaningfully. A group of young girls passed the cafe, all in matching ROTC jackets. One of them stopped when she saw her. "General Reed?" she asked, breathless. Reed smiled. "That's me." The girl's eyes shone. "We studied you last week, in our leadership unit." Reed nodded gently. "You planning to wear the uniform?" The girl hesitated, then squared her shoulders. "Yes, ma'am. I want to serve." "Then serve with honor," Reed said. "But never forget, your worth comes before the rank." The girl nodded, and the group continued down the block, heads a little higher now. General Reed turned back to the window. Her reflection stared back, strong, steady, whole, not defined by what had been done to her, but by how she rose in the face of it. Because justice, she knew, wasn't a single act. It was a choice, made again and again, by those brave enough to demand it. And today, she had chosen it. Again, thank you for watching. Subscribe me and hit the notification bell to not miss new stories. Bye.